The invasion begins. Charred ruins Terran troops stomped over charred human bodies, tossing them into the ruins of skyscrapers reduced to rubble, laughing as they enacted the final solution to the human problem. Lieutenant Mark Burns of the United Earth Defense Forces limped through the devastation, blood seeping from the cauterized stump of his right leg, ended by a Katerian plasma bolt. Exhausted, grimy, but driven by cold determination, he dug through wreckage until his hands bled, uncovering a buried communications array. Desperate repairs, Burns pried open the casing and ripped out fried components, slamming in scavenged parts. He had to reach UEDF command. The Katerian surprise attack came during peace negotiations, their ships strafing cities while smiling diplomats shook hands. Trusting the Terran was Earth's fatal mistake. After an hour of frantic repairs, the array crackled to life, but instead of command, it spat out distress calls from decimated UEDF units, pleading for reinforcements that never came. The UEDF was in full retreat. A message of despair. The array spat out a message from Colonel Knox, the Katerian overseer assigned to monitor the doomed peace process. Rejoice, human filth. The infestation of your wretched species ends today. The cracked screen flickered, displaying a massive Katerian armada flooding into the solar system. Thousands of Evistor-class warships, each one built to burn worlds. Burns slammed the array off, denying Knox the satisfaction of a reply. UEDF defenses couldn't hold against a fleet that size. Humanity would be wiped out, forced into slavery, tortured for Katerian amusement, unless... The legend of the lost fleets, an old legend, surfaced in Burns's mind. The legend of the lost fleets. Heroic human ships said to return in Earth's darkest hour. Most dismissed it as myth, but with annihilation staring mankind in the face, Burns wondered and hoped even as Katerian bombs blotted out the sun. A new alliance. Exploration mission 3 years before the Katerian onslaught. The UEDF exploratory vessel Mellon ventured to the fringes of known space. Captain John Mercer, a veteran of dozens of first contact missions, sat in the command chair, his eyes fixed on the display. He had overseen historic moments before, but something about this mission felt different. The anticipation on the bridge was palpable as the crew worked their stations with practiced efficiency. Uncharted planet, Captain. Long-range scans have detected an uncharted planet, the sensor officer reported. Preliminary data suggests evidence of an advanced civilization. Mercer leaned forward, his interest piqued. What kind of evidence? Sprawling cities, advanced infrastructure, and what appears to be a global network of terraforming installations. Interesting. Mercer stroked his chin. Prep a landing party. Let's go say hello. First contact, the Mellon entered orbit, and Mercer led the landing party down in a shuttlecraft. As they descended through the atmosphere, they marveled at the planet's vibrant colors. Lush green forests, crystal clear blue oceans, and gleaming silver cities that seemed to blend seamlessly with the natural landscape. The shuttle touched down on a landing pad outside the largest city, and the humans disembarked to find a delegation of tall, slender aliens with iridescent scales waiting for them. Ambassador Zan, the leader, stepped forward, a warm smile on his angular face. "Greetings," he said in perfect English. "I am Ambassador Zan of the Terran Empire. Welcome to our humble world." Mercer extended his hand, which Zan shook firmly. "Captain John Mercer of the United Earth Defense Forces. It's an honor to make your acquaintance." As introductions were made, Mercer couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. After centuries of brutal conflicts, humanity had finally encountered a species that seemed genuinely peaceful. Hidden dangers. Grim discoveries, but not everyone was convinced by the Terrans' friendly overtures. Ensign Mark Burns, the youngest member of the landing party and a prodigy in xenobiology, pulled Mercer aside during a break in the tour. "Captain, can I speak with you privately?" Burns asked, his voice low. Mercer nodded and followed Burns into an empty conference room. "What's on your mind, Ensign?" Suspicious data. Burns hesitated, unsure how to proceed. "Sir, something about the Terran doesn't feel right. They're terraforming, their cities, even the distribution of species on the planet. It's all too perfect." Mercer raised an eyebrow. "Too perfect? I'm not sure I follow. The habitat domes, for example. The ecosystems inside are too uniform, too consistent across different biomes. The genetic diversity of the flora is suspiciously low for a naturally evolved system." Dismissing concerns, Mercer chuckled and clapped Burns on the shoulder. "You're overthinking it, son. The Terran have been working on this planet for generations. Of course it's going to be a little too perfect. That's the point of terraforming, isn't it?" Burns frowned, not entirely convinced. "I suppose. But listen, I appreciate your concern, but let's not let baseless paranoia ruin what could be the start of a beautiful friendship. The Katarian have been nothing but gracious hosts. We have no reason to doubt their sincerity." Historic Treaty Burns reluctantly nodded, and the two men rejoined the others. The mission concluded with a grand ceremony in the Terran capital, where Mercer and Zan signed a historic treaty establishing formal diplomatic relations between Earth and the Terran Empire. As the Melon began its journey home, its crew buzzing with excitement about the new alliance, Mercer couldn't shake the feeling that this was the dawn of a new era. An era of peace and prosperity for all of humanity. Little did he know that the seeds of destruction had already been planted, and that the Terrans' friendly faces concealed a far more sinister agenda. Unveiling the betrayal. Return to Earth, Burns crouched behind the rubble of a collapsed wall, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The acrid stench of burning metal and flesh assaulted his nostrils as he surveyed the devastation around him. The once bustling city lay in ruins, its towering skyscrapers reduced to twisted heaps of steel and concrete. He had to find other survivors, rally what remained of Earth's defenses. But as he picked his way through the debris, dodging Terran patrols with their gleaming armor and deadly plasma rifles, his thoughts drifted back to the days after the Melon's fateful mission. Uneasy Truth's Earth had embraced the Terran with open arms, hailing them as saviors and friends. Terran ambassadors were given lavish accommodations in every major city, their every whim catered to by fawning human officials. In return, Earth's leaders were invited to speak before the Terran Assembly, their words broadcast across the galaxy. But Burns had never trusted the Terran, not since those first unsettling discoveries on their homeworld. He had pored over the genetic data from the samples they had brought back, his unease growing with each anomaly he uncovered. The Katarian flora was too perfect, too uniform. It was as if every plant had been meticulously engineered, shaped by a technology far beyond anything Earth possessed. Espionage's suspicions only deepened when he heard whispers of Terran officials requesting access to restricted Earth facilities, military bases, research labs, even the UEDF's command center. Burns had taken his concerns to Admiral Singh, his mentor and friend. To his relief, Singh had listened. "If what you're saying is true," Singh had said, his brow furrowed, "then we have a serious problem on our hands. We can't afford to take any chances, not with the safety of Earth at stake." A hidden threat together, they had assembled a covert task force, handpicking the best and brightest from across the UEDF. For months, they had worked in secret, monitoring Terran communications, tracking their movements, piecing together the truth behind the aliens' friendly facade. What they uncovered was chilling. The Katarian had been building a vast network of spies and saboteurs, worming their way into every level of Earth's government and military. They had infiltrated research facilities, stolen classified technologies, and even begun to manipulate public opinion through a sophisticated propaganda campaign. Tragic loss. Burns and Singh had been on the verge of exposing the Terrans' true intentions when disaster struck. Singh's transport, carrying the evidence they had so painstakingly gathered, had suffered a catastrophic malfunction and crashed into the ocean. There were no survivors. The memory of that day still haunted Burns, the pain as fresh as the wound on his leg. Singh had been more than just his commanding officer. He had been a father figure, a guiding light in the darkness. With his death, Their investigation had crumbled, and Burns had been left alone to carry the burden of the truth. Rising resistance. Unexpected allies. A sudden explosion ripped Burns from his reverie, the shockwave slamming him against the wall. A Terran drone had struck a nearby office tower, sending a hail of glass and steel raining down on the street below. Burns shielded his face with his arm, wincing as shards of debris sliced into his skin. He had to keep moving, had to find a way to stop the Terran before it was too late. Earth's fate hung in the balance, and he was the only one who knew the true extent of the danger they faced. Underground hideout. Burns limped through the ruined streets, his injured leg throbbing with each step. The sound of Terran patrols echoed in the distance, their harsh laughter sending chills down his spine. He had to find shelter, a place to regroup and plan his next move. A half-collapsed parking garage loomed ahead, its concrete walls pockmarked with plasma scorch marks. Burns limped inside, his eyes straining to adjust to the dim light. Survivors camped suddenly. The unmistakable click of a rifle safety catch being released froze him in his tracks. "Don't move," a gruff voice commanded. "Hands where I can see them." Burns complied, raising his hand slowly. "I'm human." Lieutenant Mark Burns, UEDF. A figure emerged from the shadows, a battered rifle trained on Burns's chest. The man was older, his face weathered and scarred. His tattered UEDF uniform bore the insignia of a sergeant. "Burns, huh?" The man lowered his weapon. "I'm Sergeant Hawkins. You alone?" "A shared mission." Burns nodded. "As far as I know, my unit was wiped out in the initial attack." Hawkins lowered his weapon, motioning for Burns to follow. "Come on, we've got a little hideout deeper in the garage." As they navigated the debris-strewn corridors, Hawkins spoke over his shoulder. "I've got a few survivors with me. We've been laying low, trying to gather intel on the Katerians' movements." Grim realizations. They entered a small, dimly lit room where a handful of soldiers huddled around a flickering lantern. They looked up wearily as Burns entered, their eyes haunted and hollow. Hawkins gestured to a crate. "Take a load off, Lieutenant. You look like hell." Burns sank onto the crate, wincing as he stretched out his injured leg. "I can't believe this is happening. The Terrians. We trusted them." Hawkins snorted. "Trust. That's always been humanity's weakness." He leaned against the wall, his eyes distant. "You know, this isn't the first time the Terran have pulled something like this." A dark past. Burns looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I fought in the last war with the Katerian, decades ago. They'd pulled the same stunt back then, came to us as friends, then stabbed us in the back." Hawkins spat on the ground. "We managed to capture one of their high-ranking officers, a colonel. We interrogated him for days before he finally cracked." The other soldiers leaned in, their eyes wide. Hawkins continued, his voice low and intense. He spilled his guts about a secret Katerian protocol, something they called the Reaping. It was their playbook for conquering other worlds. A desperate gamble. Old tactics. Hawkins paced the room, his boots crunching on the debris-strewn floor. First, they'd come as allies, all smiles and open arms. They'd share their tech, their knowledge, making themselves indispensable. But all the while, they'd be working behind the scenes, undermining defenses, stirring up trouble. He paused, his eyes locking with Burns. "Sound familiar?" Burns nodded grimly, the pieces falling into place, and once they'd weakened their target, they'd strike. Revenge plan. Hawkins finished. Their fleets would come out of nowhere, overwhelming the poor bastards before they even knew what hit them. "So what happened back then? How did we beat them?" Hawkins chuckled darkly. "We used the intel against them, laid a trap, made them think we were on the ropes. When they committed their fleet, we hit them with everything we had, crippled their military, forced them to sue for peace." A bitter lesson. He shook his head. "But we got soft, bought their lies about being rogue extremists, about how they truly wanted peace. We were so tired of war, we convinced ourselves they'd changed." Burns clenched his fists, anger welling up inside him. But they didn't change, did they? They were just biding their time, waiting for another chance. Hawkins said bitterly, "Your little melon mission rolled out the red carpet for the Reaping 2.0. Under attack suddenly, the sound of plasma fire erupted from the garage entrance. Hawkins cursed, grabbing his rifle. They found us. Defensive positions now. The soldiers scrambled, overturning crates and debris to form makeshift barricades. Burns snatched up a fallen plasma rifle, ignoring the pain in his leg as he took cover beside Hawkins. A squad of Terran soldiers burst into the room, their sleek armor gleaming in the dim light. Holding the line, they opened fire, plasma bolts sizzling through the air. Hawkins returned fire, his shots finding their mark. 2 Terran went down, their armor smoking, but more poured in, their weapons spitting death. "Burns," Hawkins shouted over the chaos. "There's a maintenance tunnel in the back. Leads to the sewers. Take the others. And go." Burns shook his head. "I'm not leaving you behind." Hawkins grabbed him by the collar, his eyes fierce. "Listen to me, Lieutenant. You're the only one who knows the truth about the Katerian. You have to survive, have to find a way to stop them. Sacrifice." He shoved Burns towards the tunnel. "Now go. I'll buy you as much time as I can." Burns hesitated, torn, but the look in Hawkins' eyes broke no argument. He nodded, gathering the other soldiers as they fled into the tunnel. The sound of plasma fire intensified behind them. Burns risked a final glance back, just in time to see Hawkins disappear in a hail of searing blue bolts, a defiant roar on his lips. A new dawn. Emerging from the tunnel's tears stung Burns' eyes as he limped through the dank sewer tunnel, the weight of Hawkins' sacrifice heavy on his shoulders. The grizzled sergeant had given his life so that Burns could live, could carry on the fight. And fight he would, even if it took his last breath. Burns vowed to find a way to stop the Katerian. For Hawkins, for Earth, for all the worlds that had fallen before, and all those yet to come. The hidden bunker. Burns descended deeper into the bowels of the city, his footsteps echoing in the dank, dimly lit tunnels. The sewer network was a labyrinth of rusted pipes and crumbling brick, but Burns navigated it with a grim sense of purpose. He had to find the hidden UEDF bunker, had to contact Admiral Mercer before it was too late. After what felt like hours of trudging through the muck, Burns finally reached his destination, a nondescript metal door set into the wall of a long-abandoned maintenance room. Reaching out, Burns inputted a series of codes into the keypad, his fingers trembling with exhaustion and pain. The door hissed open, revealing a small Spartan chamber filled with outdated computer equipment. Burns limped to the central console, his eyes scanning the array of buttons and screens. There, in the center of the panel, was the quantum entanglement communicator. The device was a marvel of modern physics, capable of instant communication across the vast reaches of space. Burns had never used one before, but he knew it was his only hope of reaching Mercer. A plan unfolds. With a deep breath, Burns activated the communicator. The screen flickered to life, static crackling across its surface. Burns leaned in, his voice hoarse as he spoke. "Admiral Mercer, this is Lieutenant Burns. Do you read me?" For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a familiar face appeared on the screen. Mercer looked older than Burns remembered, his once youthful features lined with worry and guilt. "Burns, my God, you're alive. What's happening down there?" Desperate measures. Burns wasted no time, his words tumbling out in a rush. "The Katerian. Sir, they've invaded. Earth is falling. I've uncovered the truth about their alliance. It was all a ruse, a ploy to weaken our defenses. They call it the Reaping." Mercer's face paled, his eyes widening with horror. "I should have listened to you all those years ago. I'm so sorry, Burns." Burns shook his head. "There's no time for apologies, sir. We need to act, and fast. What's the status of our fleet?" Last hope. Mercer's expression turned grim. "Scattered, badly damaged. but there may be a way. Before the invasion, our scientists were working on a new weapon, codenamed Prometheus. It's an EMP device designed to disable an entire fleet at once. But it's untested, and it requires a massive power source. Where can we find one? The only suitable reactor is at a research station on Titan. If you can get to a spaceport, rendezvous with one of our ships in orbit, you might be able to reach it. It's a long shot, but it's our only chance. Final push. Burns nodded, his heart steeled. Understood, sir. I'll find a way. Suddenly, a series of tremors shook the bunker, dust raining down from the ceiling. Burns whirled, his eyes widening as an ominous hissing sound filled the air. What the hell was that? Mercer demanded, his voice tinged with panic. Burns didn't have time to respond. With a deafening screech of metal on metal, a massive drilling machine burst through the wall, disgorging a swarm of heavily armed Caterian soldiers. Their armor glinted in the dim light, their weapons trained on Burns. Defiant Stan Burns dove for cover, snatching up a plasma rifle from a nearby rack. He knew he was outnumbered, outgunned, but he also knew that if he fell here, Earth fell with him. Burns, what's happening? Mercer's voice crackled over the communicator, but Burns had no time to respond. The Terran opened fire, plasma bolts sizzling through the air. Burns returned fire, his shots finding their mark. 2 soldiers went down, their armor smoking, but more poured in, their weapons spitting death. A desperate battle. Burns fought with every ounce of skill and tenacity he possessed. He ducked and weaved, using the bunker's tight confines to his advantage. Plasma bolts scorched the walls around him, but he pressed on, driven by a newfound sense of purpose. Wave after wave of Terran fell before him, but not without cost. Burns took several hits, his armor absorbing the worst of the damage, but he could feel his strength waning, his wounds taking their toll. A final gambit, just as it seemed he would be overwhelmed. Burns saw an opening, a Caterian grenade fallen from the belt of a dead soldier. He snatched it up, primed it, and lobbed it into the heart of the Caterian formation. The explosion rocked the bunker, sending shrapnel and bodies flying. Burns seized the moment, charging through the smoke and chaos. He emerged on the other side, battered but unbroken. Hope restored. The bunker was a ruin, the Terran bodies strewn among the rubble, but the communicator, miraculously, was still intact. Burns limped to the console, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Admiral, I'm heading to the surface. I'll find a way to Titan, or die trying. Mercer's voice was thick with emotion. Godspeed, Burns. The fate of Earth is in your hands. Into the fray. Burns cut the connection, his gaze hardening with determination. He knew the odds were against him. He knew the journey ahead would be perilous, perhaps impossible. But he also knew he had no choice. Earth needed him. Humanity needed him. And he would not fail them, not while he still drew breath. With a final glance at the ruined bunker, Burns turned and limped towards the surface, ready to begin his last, desperate mission.